Great.
Hi, welcome to the launch of the Infrastructure and Nature webinar series. My name is Kate Newman, Vice President of Sustainable Infrastructure at World Wildlife Fund in the United States. Last year, a group of individuals from around 20 organizations ranging from NGOs to government to multilateral development banks and research institutions and the private sector came together to co-host a week-long pavilion at the World Conservation Congress of the IUCN on one fascinating topic: how infrastructure in our future can be developed in harmony with nature for the future of our planet and our society's well-being. One of the central themes of the 2021 Congress is economic and financial systems. And I say 2021 because the Congress has been delayed again. It is no longer in 2020. It's no longer in early 2021. It's going to be later in 2021. We don't know yet when it will be. And one of the central themes is economic and financial systems that support human livelihoods and economic development while sustaining nature and addressing the climate impacts. Infrastructure is at the foundation of economic development, of course, and it has a central role in playing for our future and the well-being of the planet. Our pavilion is designed to explore how the private sector, civil society, government can work together to reimagine how we're going to protect and support nature's engineering, the essential services nature already provides for economic needs that we have, and then how we can develop the future of our built infrastructure so that it remains in harmony with nature and serves a healthy planet and thriving communities tomorrow and for generations to come. It's a big challenge, it's a fascinating one, and in spite of the delays brought on by the pandemic, critical decisions are being made on infrastructure and deliberations continue on the global agreements like the Convention on Biological Diversity and climate change going into now what we're calling super year 2021 instead of 2020. So our group decided to go on ahead and start these deliberations in anticipation of the Congress when it will be held next year. And we're going to hold a virtual pavilion with a broader audience than could have made it to France in the first place over the next 2 months. So Ryan, I'd like to hand it over to you to give us details about how we're going to be rolling out this Infrastructure and Nature webinar series in the coming days. Take it away, Ryan.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kate, and thank you to everyone who has joined us so far and continues to come in. It's a real privilege to have such a diverse audience from around the world. So my name is Ryan Bartlett. I'm the Director of Climate Risk Management and Resilience at the WWF here in Washington, DC. So this is the first in a series of 6 webinars that we are organizing with this amazing group of organizations. The first is today, obviously. The second is on October 15th, all about upstream planning and policy conditions for really enabling more sustainable infrastructure investments. The 29th of October, all about dealing with biodiversity related financial risks in infrastructure investments. The 5th of November, really focusing on engineering with nature and hybrid approaches and exploring nature-based solutions. November 19th, really looking at how to better balance ecological connectivity and linear infrastructure. And December 10th, the idea is to synthesize all of these webinars into a discussion really exploring what are the ramifications for the World Conservation Congress in 2021 and other policy forums like the UNFCCC, CBD, and others, so that we can provide some recommendations for policymakers as they move forward into this now delayed super year. If you want to find out more about this series, please go to the IENE website, iene.info, or you can find more information at this link. So I have the privilege now of introducing our moderator for today's discussion. Amar Bhattacharya is a senior fellow at the Global Economy and Development Program at the Brookings Institution. His research and policy work include the global economy, development finance, global governance, and the links between climate and development. His main focus in recent years has been on sustainable infrastructure, both in deepening the knowledge base and fostering transformative change. From April 2007 until September 2014, he was director of the Group of 24, an intergovernmental group of developing country finance ministers and central bank governors. Prior to taking up his position with the G24, Mr. Bhattacharya had a long-standing career in the World Bank. So, Amar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Kate. It's a real privilege for me to moderate this first of this webinar series, setting the scene, converging crises and sustainable infrastructure in a COVID-19 world. And this conversation really could not be more timely. I'll have an opportunity to introduce the subject and the panelists, but let me first begin by welcoming our keynote address, which is from a recorded message from Amy Frankel, Executive Secretary, Convention on the Conservation and Migratory Species. Ms. Frankel has over 30 years of experience in international environmental law and policy. She has held senior positions in UN agencies, the legislative and executive branches of the US government, and the private sector. Before joining CMS, she worked at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biodiversity in Montreal, where she was director of the Division for Mainstreaming Cooperation and Outreach. She has also served for 6 years as the director of UNEP's Regional Office for North America. We could not be more privileged to have this address from her. So over to you, Ryan.
It is a real pleasure to provide opening remarks for this very important topic. The focus of this webinar is very timely. We are truly at a crossroads with respect to whether we use, change, and destroy our natural world, or if we can find a way to sustainably use, protect, and restore it. As you undoubtedly know, the UN held a summit on biodiversity just yesterday, aimed at galvanizing commitments for a more effective new global biodiversity framework. Now, few could predict that it would take place in the middle of a global pandemic, a pandemic that was likely caused by human activities that overexploit wild animals and destroy nature. In fact, the same activities that are increasing the risks of future infectious diseases, such as COVID-19, are those that are causing the decline of wild species of animals. These include the killing of wild species for food or income, as well as for recreation. Such uses go far beyond international trade in animals, and we are still trying to understand the full magnitude. Second is the destruction of natural habitat and the encroachment of activities that bring humans and their livestock in close proximity to wild species, thus increasing the risk of spillovers of pathogens to humans. The data for both species decline and the increase of new diseases is eye-opening. 75% of all new infectious diseases are zoonotic diseases, which jump from animals to humans, and we are losing wild species of plants and animals at an unprecedented rate, with as many as 1 million species that could go extinct in the near term. Unfortunately, the pressures on wild animals and their habitats are expected to grow exponentially over the coming decades, with millions of kilometers of planned new roads, massive increases in energy infrastructure, unprecedented human population growth, urban expansion, food insecurity, and climate change. There is clearly a need to improve infrastructure to achieve decent living standards around the world, including for telecom, water supply, food distribution, transportation, and energy. But the choices of what infrastructure is needed, whether it is needed, and how it is designed and built are absolutely essential. Often, decisions to invest in a particular type of infrastructure occur without a full consideration of options for achieving the desired services and without a full cost-benefit evaluation of the impacts of any planned infrastructure on the natural environment. It is critically important that these elements be part of an upstream planning process, sometimes referred to as strategic environment assessment. Such upstream planning usually will produce a far better outcome, including from the view of economics. For example, rather than build a new energy facility at all, it might be cheaper and as effective to reduce leakage from existing plants. If a new facility is needed, there are many more options to choose from, including renewable energy. At the next level down, the siting of infrastructure also has to be carefully considered. For instance, wind farms can be a major threat to migratory birds. Roads, railroads, and fences create barriers for the movement of animals and can also lead to direct mortality. Work is ongoing under the Convention on Migratory Species to address these kinds of issues under our Energy Task Force and new work on linear infrastructure. Let me finally turn to a key concept that offers solutions to these multiple challenges: ecological connectivity. In February this year, the 13th Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Migratory Species underscored the importance of connectivity for the survival of migratory species and called for its inclusion in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Connectivity is a different concept than protected areas. It embodies the natural patterns and life cycles of wild species and provides a kind of roadmap for action. As you know, migratory wild animals will try to follow their natural instincts even as human populations grow and expand. Connectivity points to the need to address the habitat and movement needs of wild species, even as we strive for human development. It also provides a powerful concept as we seek to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in a manner that does not sacrifice the natural environment and as we try to reduce the risk of another pandemic. Many thanks for the opportunity to open this webinar, and I wish you a very good session.
Thank you all. The first was, really privileged to watch that, and that provides us an excellent setting. We now have a panel that will, delve into the issues that have been laid out. Before I introduce them, let me just say that, the context that we are facing today provides a unique challenge, but also a unique opportunity to address many of the issues that have been laid out and that were present before COVID. But the context has changed dramatically because COVID is a crisis like no other that we have faced. It's a challenge in terms of its human costs, its social costs, its economic costs, and indeed the fact that it has highlighted, as was noted, the strong linkages between climate and pandemics. So in this context, we are really facing two challenges. The first is, how do we build back better from this crisis? How do we tackle the underlying vulnerabilities that were there? But in doing that, we have to keep in mind that we are in a unique transformative period in the coming 2 decades. The world needs to build almost the same stock of infrastructure that exists on the planet today over these coming 2 decades. And if we repeat what we did in the past, then we will not just kill the planet, but we will not even serve the people who are on it. So this is the opportunity for us to rethink the way we approach the sustainability of investments and, in some sense, not just their environmental impacts, but also their social impacts and the economic durability of these investments. There has been a tremendous amount of thinking going on in this space, and the panel that is there will allow us to particularly focus on the very, very important links between the upstream thinking around nature, thinking about nature, about the challenges that we are facing in terms of the spatial dimensions in particular, and how do we ensure that the infrastructure we build is a sustainable infrastructure for our children. So the panel that we have today consists of Anne Burrell from the European Commission, Franco Pizza from Bancolombia, Jean-François Lessine, and Lisa Garnier from RTE, France's Electricity Transmission Network, and Yannick Autre from the Ministry of Ecological Transition of the Government of France. I will have an opportunity to introduce each of them as we go through the panel, but let me begin with the first panelist. Each of them has 5 minutes for this initial intervention. We will then move to a moderated Q&A, and after that, a Q&A with the audience. So it's a privilege for me to introduce our first panelist, Anne Burrell, who is Advisor for Natural Capital, in the Director General of Environment of the European Commission. Anne Burrell is Advisor as I mentioned, in the Director General of Environment. Her previous responsibilities in this directorate include management of the Life Nature program, pursuing environmental diplomacy in the context of bilateral and multilateral relations, and development of the EU's policy on integrated coastal zone management. Previously, Anne Burrell worked at the Commission's Joint Centre on issues related to natural resource management and monitoring, including the development of crop growth models. Before joining the Commission, she worked as an environmental information consultant. Anne Burrell studied geography and subsequently economics. She holds degrees from Dartmouth College and Columbia University in the US, and a postgraduate diploma from the University of London. Anne, the floor is yours.
Yes, good day and welcome to everyone. So I've been asked to talk a bit about the policy context in the European Union. Well, of course, for decades, the EU has aimed to provide economic well-being for our continent. What's new today is our approach on how to provide this well-being for today and for tomorrow. Our European Green Strategy is our new growth strategy, and I would stress it should guide all of our policy making. It highlights our key environmental challenges and the transformational actions that are needed to future-proof our economy and ensure the well-being over the long term of our society. This strategy and the specific policies that it announces follow the principle of do no harm, and they put ecosystem protection and restoration at the heart of their initiatives. This is something new. Specifically in the area of climate, the European Green Deal commitments have already paved the way for our proposed 2030 climate target plan, which would increase the EU's greenhouse gas emission reduction target for 2030 to at least 55% compared to 1990. The European Green Deal acknowledges that we need lots of investments to make these transformations to our society, but we need to do it right with investments in sustainable practices and in new green jobs. This includes both in investing in making our traditional infrastructure greener, as well as investing in scaling up nature-based solutions. Overall, the European Green Deal sets a clear framework in which our administrations, our citizens, and the private sector can come together to build a sustainable future. Next slide, please. Turning specifically to the EU's biodiversity strategy, which is part of the European Green Deal, this strategy aims to restore and protect our natural capital, to prevent and build resilience of our society, including to future zoonosis outbreaks. It calls for addressing the main causes of biodiversity loss, acknowledging that natural capital is an essential basis for our prosperity. By improving the understanding of the value of nature, it will provide business and investment opportunities. As you see, there are 4 main elements listed on the slide. Restoration in particular means investment to ensure that we use our land sustainably, and by the way, help on our climate goals. This should include bringing back nature in urban areas through urban greening plans. This would include investments to create biodiverse and accessible urban forests, urban meadows, green roofs and walls, etc. Concerning the global element, we're very pleased that many countries have just joined us in signing the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. We also look for the engagement of international companies. Next, please. Another very important element of the European Green Deal is the taxonomy regulation. This is a tool to help make informed investment decisions on environmentally sustainable activities and to help companies pass a signal to their customers and shareholders. As you can see here, the regulation identifies 6 environmental objectives. For an economic activity to be considered green or environmentally sustainable, it must substantially contribute to at least one of the objectives and to do no significant harm to any of the other objectives. It must also respect minimum social safeguards. The detailed criteria for the different objectives are still being developed, with the first one on climate change expected by the end of this year. The taxonomy provides a common language around green economic activities and works to enhance transparency through a disclosure obligation. Of course, the regulation is not a mandatory list of things to invest in, but we believe it will help incentivize sustainable investment, including in infrastructure that meets climate and biodiversity goals. Next, please. So we all know that money makes the world go round. So how will the EU budget, which covers the many financial instruments by which the EU stimulates the implementation of its policies, how will it catalyze sustainability? Well, our proposal for the coming period contains a carbon target. The European Parliament would like to also put in a minimum amount for biodiversity. We don't yet know whether that will be in the final deal, but anyway, this budget is clearly the greenest that the EU has ever had. Since the European Green Deal was adopted, we've been asked and have checked that the individual instruments under the budget will indeed support the goals of the European Green Deal and its components. In particular, we were asked to and have done an assessment on the Common Agricultural Policy. The Commission is happy that the Council seems to also support our objectives of a green budget, since at their meeting in July, the Council concluded that EU expenditure should be consistent with the Paris Agreement objectives and the do no harm principle. Taken together, the instruments of the new budget should help promote investments that accelerate the transition towards sustainability. I'd just like to particularly signal the new InvestEU facility. And sorry, that's wrong on the slide. It says EU Invest, it should be InvestEU. Which, among other things, this will be providing EU budget guarantees for investments in sustainable infrastructure. Finally, on the last slide, I would like to mention that the EU is also aiming to provide a temporary reinforcement to its normal budget with an additional $750 billion to support economic recovery from the coronavirus. This is our chance, as Omar mentioned, to build back better. This additional finance will also be implemented in line with the European Green Deal and the Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, the new Recovery and Resilience Facility will allocate finance on the basis of national recovery and resilience plans. These plans must address the green and digital transformation that we need, as well as the Member States' national energy and climate plans and the Just Transition plans. We believe that this new money at the national level for green recovery should help provide additional opportunities for private investments in sustainability. So, taken all together, over the past 12 months, we've seen a dramatic shift in the policy landscape in the EU. There's a new focus on moving towards a sustainable future, and it's understood this is essential for our economy, for our society. Both the policy framework and the budget opens up new possibilities for green investment, including in green infrastructure. Now it's up to the other actors to make it happen in practice. Thank you.
Is muted. Okay. Thank you very much, Anne. So we will now turn to our next panelist, Franco Pizza, Head of Sustainability at Bancolombia. Since August 2015, he has served as Corporate Director of Sustainability. He has worked in the areas of international trade, credit analysis, and credit risk. In 2008, he designed and led Bancolombia's Environmental Management Division and served as Sustainability Manager from 2011 to 2015 to lead the group's environmental and social impact strategy, including the Bancolombia Foundation. Born in Bogota, Franco got his degree in public accounting, specializing in financial management and organizational development from the Central University of Bogota. Franco, the panel is yours. 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Amar, thank you very much, and hello to everybody that is sharing with us this interesting conversation. Okay, first, I am trying to put here this beautiful image about biodiversity in Colombia. This is a really interesting and amazing natural capital, not just for the country, but for the world. So how to protect it is something relevant, not just for the Colombians, but for every company and every actor in the region and in the world. So next, please, next slide. How to advance in this specific model and how financial sector could support this kind of initiatives, but it's not just by philanthropy. It's because it's a good business and because the world is moving on this path. So Bancolombia during the last 15 years has been developing a specific framework about sustainability, and you can see on the slide which kind of commitments we are developing. The first is how to involve in the strategy. We are working in 4 countries, 3 in Central America and in Colombia, and how to involve these kind of initiatives and environmental, social, and governance issues in our strategy is something relevant, because we understand that if you could use the core of the business of Bancolombia, we could make an important change in the region. So we are just measuring the impact in environmental and social aspects in each decision of business, and we are involved with 3 specific aspects here, trying to offer an answer to the market about how to use and also implement nature-based solutions and how to establish a sustainable infrastructure. So for us, risk, business, and climate change are 3 topics which are relevant on this land. We are members of the Equator Principles, and this is a specific set of safe words about environmental and social aspect that we are involved with during the last 10 years in each credit that we are offering to the market, to our customers. And also, we are developing a specific green credit lines and social credit lines to offer new opportunities for the economy and the market, trying to support different technologies as renewable energies, green mobility, green construction, and every activity linked with sustainability concepts or sustainability frameworks. So for us, it's interesting, and a couple of numbers will be offered to you in the next slide. But before, climate change is something relevant and important for us. We are committed with the 1.5 Celsius degrees for this decade, and how to establish also specific goals and specific activities with our customers, many of them in 10 specific activities that are really compromised with the pollution in CO2 emissions, and how to work with them in order to make the transitions in the next 10 years. We are working together with different initiatives worldwide, trying to establish a better performance in our portfolio. But also something is really relevant here, and it's our talent and how to could also offering to them the knowledge and the expertise in order to offering to our customers better options to construct a sustainable infrastructure for the economy. Finally, in this slide, the impact is something relevant, and we are measuring the impact here, not just as economic basis, but also which is the impact on social and environmental issues for this strategy in Bancolombia. Finally, transparency. All of this strategy is public, is offering to our different stakeholders and different media issues. For example, all is public in our website, and also we are looking on this different kind of activities with different actors. Next slide, please. Here, we can see a very specific timeline about all of these different kind of initiatives and some numbers here also. In Equator Principle, during the last 10 years, we are evaluating at least 1,300 projects involved with this kind of safeguard, which is something relevant and interesting for, because in Latin America, you can observe a specific trend. Today, at least 11 countries are developing green protocols using this kind of safeguards in order to implement better decisions in their business. Also, in climate change, we are offering business and different kind of opportunities for our customers. We are members also of UNPRI, and we are establishing different kind of funds, investment funds, in order to move more resources in that way. Finally, in the next slide, which is common right now, we are members of the Global Investor for Sustainable Development, and we are working together with other 29 CEOs worldwide, trying to move more investments to the SDG agenda. So this kind of initiatives could offer to the market more options and alternatives. So this is my final conclusion here. We are working together in order to address these kind of commitments and how to move more solutions that are offering better alternatives for the nature. Thank you very much, Emmer.
Thank you. Somebody has to allow me to turn my video on. Let me now go to the next panelist. Actually, it's a joint presentation by Jean-François Lessine and Lisa Garnier. Jean-François Lessine is a graduate engineer from the École Supérieure d'Électricité. He held various positions of responsibility in electricity transmission and production before becoming RTE's environmental manager in 2005. In 2008, he participated in the foundation of the Club for Linear Infrastructure and Biodiversity, which has been he has been coordinating since then. He is vice chairman of the Strategic Orientation Council of the Foundation for Research on Biodiversity. He is a member of the National Biodiversity Committee. He will be joined by Lisa Garnier, who is a specialist on biodiversity with a PhD in ecology. She is the project leader for corporate social responsibility and R&D for all biodiversity interactions, marine as well as terrestrial wildlife. She has been working at the Natural History Museum of Paris as a project leader in citizen science in relation with biodiversity and as a project manager at the research department of the Ministry of Sustainable Development in France. Jean-François and Lisa, you have 6 minutes between the two of you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. RTE is a French electricity transmission system operator. This network consists of 100,000 kilometers of power lines. 70% of this network is in agriculture areas, 20% in forest or natural areas. This network, for the most part outside cities, has impact on nature. The first impact has been taken in consideration is the impact on birds. They can be electrocuted when landing on the pylons, or they can hit the power cables during their flight. Since the 80s, electricians have been working to make cables less dangerous by equipping them with anti-collision devices to make them visible. A little more than 10 years ago, RTE became aware that under power lines, there could be a rich biodiversity, and that by improving vegetation management methods, This biodiversity could be protected and then improved. For this, we have conducted several projects to experiment new methods, with which Lisa Garnier will present to you now.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is a nightmare for RTE? It's an accident between a power line and a tree, with the result, no more transport of electricity. So next slide. So what we do in general is cutting for continuously stopping the natural growth of surrounding plants to secure overhead lines against vegetation interference. And the most employed technique is gerogriding. But the more we do it, the more organic matter is accumulating and the more light that fosters germination of plant species will love light and they grow faster than the other. So that's an infernal pressure of maintenance, but it is very satisfying because it reduces risks with trees and lower anxiety. Next slide. So in 2011, RTE entered Belgian Grid's Elias LIFE project financed by the European Union, which experimented a new approach. It was planting in order to control the species growing under power lines. Planting, but also building cooperations with breeders, hunters, and biodiversity management partners. This is always a big challenge because RTE, and that is true for the others, transmission systems operator, we are not the landowners. So, next slide. This project is a change in the practice based on ecological and social collective intelligence. Next slide. So you will say, why we have not done that before? Well, it needs a certain investment. As you see, pastures, the red lines, cost less in terms of maintenance in the long term compared to the classical one. So we have to climb a step and demonstrate that it works at an industrial level. Next slide. So the BELIEF project is a pilot study to develop expertise and feedback for vegetation maintenance, to size at a regional scale, organizational and financial support. So it's in 3 regions in France. It has a triple goal, benefits for vegetation costs, local partners, and biodiversity. Our goal is to reach 200 hectares at the end of 2020. But the good news is that we are writing a new industrial alternative vegetation management politics before at the end of 2020. But the next goal is 48,000 hectares. So.
Thank you. Next slide, please. These issues of fragmentation and the possibility to contribute to ecological corridors are common to all linear infrastructures such as roads, railway, electricity networks, gas networks, and waterways such as canals and rivers. Next, please. This is why in 2008, the French managers of these infrastructures decided to come together to work on these issues by founding the Club of Linear Infrastructures and Biodiversity. A charter was signed to consolidate commitments that are working together for biodiversity, sharing our experiences, making common proposals to advance practices and regulation, working together with NGOs. Thus, 6 years ago, together with IUCN France, we have determined how an infrastructure corridor could become an ecological corridor. A guideline has been written. It is available on the CLB website. We have demonstrated that nature could coexist with an industrial infrastructure under certain conditions. Infrastructures are by nature long corridor. They can have an ecological role as ecological corridors. Next slide, please. We also wanted to increase our knowledge by working with scientists. Thus, since 2014, we have been working with the French research program, ITECOP, and participate in the financing of calls for research projects. Yannick Autrey will tell you more in a moment. This work with ITECOP has been an opportunity to integrate the high E&E community and for our companies to progress faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Our last panelist is Yannick Autrey from the Ministry of Ecological Transition. Yannick is a geographer, urban planner with an MSc in planning, urbanism, and space dynamics from Sorbonne University, and an international expert in natural resources management. He works in the Research and Innovation Department of the French Ministry of Transport and the Environment. He is in charge of research on the environmental impacts of transport, including pollution, landscapes, and biodiversity. And since 2010, he has been managing the National Research Program on land transport, infrastructure, ecosystems, and landscapes. He's a member of the governance board of the European Research Network, INE, that was just mentioned. He led INE 2016 conference that brought together 470 participants from 43 countries and managed the future European project that will start next year. Yannick, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. So I will give you a short feedback on the experience that is managed in France by the Ministry in charge of ecological transition for managing research and innovation on infrastructure and biodiversity. Please, can you go to the next slide? The great change was engaged in France in 2008, as mentioned by Jean-François Le Signe and Lisa Garnier, with the creation of a new ministry that was a mix between transport, environment, landscape, housing, energy, a bit like a Swiss knife. When we created this new ministry, we also merged different topics all together, and transport and biodiversity were also included in a larger transport research program, which was called the Credit, and a smaller program was dedicated to biodiversity and transport. Our goal was, with this program, really to engage a new way of research and innovation with a broader approach for hybridization of knowledge and to have an applied research usable by our members and by private partners. We wanted also to develop a systematic approach with all kinds of infrastructure, transport, and energy. And to reach this goal, we also worked with partners like the Research Foundation for Biodiversity, the French Office for Biodiversity, the Agency for Energy. And we also collaborated after with many private partners through the National Strategy for Biodiversity, and by beginning of 2010, 2014, exactly, we also begin a strong collaboration with infrastructure operators, the CELB, the Club for Infrastructure and Biodiversity. And can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So the will of that we had between ministry and companies that included not only biggest infrastructure operators, but also smaller companies, was really to use research as a neutral point to ensure that what was done on the field was really based on secure things, and it was based really on reproducible project. So we had to face the multiple challenge because it's really relevant to establish connection between all type of infrastructure. Usually the most common are based on road knowledge, but we have seen since that whole kind of infrastructure need also to have a ground base for knowledge. Our goal was also to create new relations between those actors and from public and private side that represent more or less at the French scale 2.5 million kilometers of infrastructure, which is not so small. And how does it function? To establish a clear relation for research with all those partners, we realized the first protocol promoting cooperation between research and action with public and private fundings. We establish in this protocol a total transparency of results. Everything is available on the website and communicated into conferences. It is validated, and results are validated by an independent scientific committee. And to reach that too, we developed a large palette of tools managed by a dedicated secretariat to manage all those actions. Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you. And time is running, and yes, we need a lot of time and discussion to reach everything. So can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, here you have a small summary of different tools that we have developed. Really, what is important in this slide is to take care that we need also to support breakthrough research. Usually, when we support research, we are more or less sure of the result. But really, we need to ensure that for the future, we can have new ideas that can be supported. And through all those tools, I can go in more in detail later into the discussion, we wanted also to ensure that we can create new ways of thinking and new ways of applying for the field of action. So can you go to the next slide? But France, it's only one country, and we really need to ensure a broader cooperation. And since close to 10 years, we are working with IEN, and we also collaborate in many different other ways with other networks. And in upcoming year, we will also communicate more on a larger European project that will start next year. Can you go on the last slide, please?
I think we might have lost Yannick temporarily. Sorry,
I'm here.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay. So thank you, Yannick. And we will now go to a Q&A. So, the panel has highlighted very strongly, actually, in some sense, these three crises at the moment: a crisis that we are facing of a pandemic, a crisis of climate, but a much broader crisis of nature and biodiversity. And what I found quite exciting from the presentations is that there is a tremendous amount of reflection that's going on and possibility of solutions. So I want to use the panel now to develop and dwell on that aspect. And let me begin with a question to you, Anne. Can you give us particular examples where your environmental and biodiversity strategy is explicitly tackling potential barriers to greater, particularly private sector investments in sustainable biodiversity-friendly outcomes?
Yes, thanks. Well, I think the first thing is we have to acknowledge that change is hard. And even when we have a knowledge of what we need to do, there's a psychological comfort in the status quo. And when we're talking about investments are normally done in a long-term perspective, and it's very hard for the private sector to suddenly shift its trajectory. This is why the European Green Deal and its various instruments talk about a transition. We know it's a process. We know that the only way it's going to work is if we bring everyone along and find ways to accompany everyone through the transition period. Let me give you an example. In the farm to fork strategy, which is the sustainable food component of the European Green Deal, we know that the transition will be particularly hard for farmers. And so even though we know that, for instance, organic farming is ultimately just as profitable, if not more profitable, than non-organic farming, the farmers need to make an investment, and it's going to take them at least 2 years to see any returns on it. So we acknowledge this, and the policy response is to mobilize, particularly the common agricultural policy, to support the farmers both through finance and through knowledge. Similarly, the farm to fork acknowledges the role of the food companies, and there it's not the idea of giving financial assistance, but in helping food companies see how to communicate what they're doing for sustainability, to communicate to the customers and to communicate it to their shareholders. And we're therefore developing a code of conduct that will talk, among other things, about how they can work with their suppliers and their value chain to try to move towards sustainability. A second example I'd mention would be something we're already doing in the area of biodiversity. Is we run what's called the Business and Biodiversity platform. This is a virtual platform where we bring together private sector actors to exchange best practice, and one of the important work streams is on developing methodologies for companies to quantify their impact on biodiversity. So this again should help them hopefully to improve their practices, to have the actual techniques to do it better, and to be able to make it visible and transparent to the world. And maybe I'd also just take the opportunity to mention that also in the context of our nature and biodiversity work, we are right now developing a guidance document which is going to outline a step-by-step approach on wind farm developments where they're taking place in Natura 2000 sites. And this hopefully will help guide investors on how to do the development of wind farms sustainably. We know we need to scale up renewable energy, but we want to make sure we're not harming biodiversity at the same time. So hopefully that will come out soon. And then in mid-December, actually, we're going to be adopting also a general methodological guidance document on Article 6 of the Habitats Directive, which will cover the impact of all types of projects, not just wind. So we're trying to support the private actors, whether it's through, in the case of the Common Agricultural Policy, with finance, but certainly with knowledge and certainly with tools to help them showcase, to measure, and to showcase their good practice.
Thank you very much, Anne. Before I turn to the next question, if I could remind all attendees that if you have a question, if you could put it in the chat box so that we can come to it when we go to the audience Q&A. Let me now turn to Jean-François and Lisa Garnier. It was really impressive hearing not just what you are pioneering, but how you are planning now to go to scale in terms of the disruptions created by the linear infrastructure that is inherent in electricity transmission. What are the company's motivations for taking this account of biodiversity in your activities? Is it the government that drives you? What are your primary motivations?
Thanks for this question. First, our company has an ISO 14001 certified environmental management system that leads us to determine our impacts and reduce them. Impacts on biodiversity, such as bird life and vegetation management, are taken into account on our processes. The government pushes us through regulation, but what we have described above is not prescribed by regulation. The government pushes us, as for example, through the voluntary commitment to the National Strategy for Biodiversity, SNB, SHEM, in 2012, yes. And now it's replaced by the Business Committed to Nature, Act for Nature. RTE is engaged, yes. But the most powerful driving force is the infrastructure neighbors and the stakeholders, because biodiversity is an issue of growing concern to our fellow citizens. The reasons that push us today to take biodiversity more intensively into account are linked to the varied composition of all the stakeholders involved around our infrastructures. This necessary consultation between the stakeholders and our companies push us to take into account environmental and biodiversity issues. There is clearly a question of acceptability of infrastructure that take biodiversity into account.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. Let me now go to Franco Bancolombia. And you come from the perspective, of course, of a financial institution. And the question is, how can the financial sector facilitate investments in projects that take into account, SDGs and the importance of nature-based solutions?
Amar, thanks for this question. I think the financial institution, as any investor, could follow this path. First, we need to understand that it's an interesting opportunity to do good business for the next decade. Second, which is also important, trying to understand which kind of problems in social and environmental aspects are right now involved in economies in the region and in each country. So in that order, we could also understand which kind of solutions are in place in order to solve these kind of issues or situations. And we have a specific range in financial sector in order to offer in more resources in order to scale these kind of solutions. For example, we are working right now in sustainable agri-tech, trying to use in a better way the resources of the environment, but also trying to offer more productivity and new opportunities for different actors in rural areas in the different countries. This is one of the examples. And second, other example could be we have different models for payment for ecosystem services, which are working right now with 2,000 families in Colombia, offering resources in order to protect the environment, but also trying to obtain benefits in a sustainable use of their lands. Other activities right now that could support for financial sector linked with SDG could be activities in circular economy or green building, because they have involved also in specific issues linked with environmental and social aspects, and also are offering good returns to the investors. That could be how to move this kind of resources to the SDG agenda.
Thank you, Franco. Let me turn to you, Yannick, and also let me really salute France for the leadership on this topic and in the IUCN, you emphasized very, very strongly the importance of research and innovation in driving, a better change, and also the importance of collaboration, within France, but also internationally. But of course, this will require funding. And how do you see the prospects and, for increase in funding for research and innovation in the space? And how can we optimize the feedback loop, between the actual research and its implementation?
Thank you for the question. Really, finding resources for research, it's a everyday struggle, including for my ministry. And what we can see is that fundings available for research on transport and biodiversity in the same approach, it's really a very, very small part. When you regard what is available for civil engineering research, it's much bigger amount of money in France and at European scale or international scale. And it's really a challenge to coordinate fundings from different partners to optimize a result for research coming from different sources. So one of the goals that we had while discussing with our private partner and with other ministries and agencies in France, it was also to ensure that with at least a small amount of money from each side, we could optimize really the results by sharing results in a common pot. And we have done this year, despite the crisis, the third public-private partnership with more or less the same amount of money than 3 years ago. And we also continue to invest through a dedicated secretariat that I manage that is also focused on the collaboration between research teams, but also with end users of research to ensure that results are understandable by practitioners and applied on the field. And it's really an everyday job to ensure that research can be not only for researchers, but also for practitioners.
Thank you very much, Yannick. And let me now turn to the questions that have been coming from the audience. And what I suggest I will do is maybe instead of just going one at a time, I'm going to go through maybe a cluster of questions and then ask any one of the panelists to come in, and we'll use our time most effectively. So the first question that we have is, biodiversity deliverables tend to be, on the soft side, as it were, and how can we kind of, get them to be more tangible? That's the first question. The second question is, biodiversity is very sensitive aspect of environmental conservation, where we need a purposeful and a common goal of all key players globally. Is there any thought or plan or strategy to involve developing countries in the loop in these initiatives? And this comes from someone from Tanzania. So let me begin with those two and see if any one of the panelists want to take that on. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, okay, I'd be happy to make some first remarks in that regard. First, on the question of the end of the results and the deliverables, I think, there are two kinds of deliverables. There's the end deliverables that we want on the ground. And yes, those need to be quantified, and we know that one of the problems that we've had is in the past, perhaps we have not been specific enough. But even when we have precise targets, for instance, on the amount of protected areas we want. And by the way, we set a specific target on increasing protected areas in the biodiversity strategy. Even if we have those kind of specific targets, we also need to have kind of process deliverables, intermediate type of deliverables, which are influencing the drivers. And that is something that's a lot more complicated because it's usually not a one-to-one correspondence between a driver and a result on the ground. So, and I think that's probably actually one of the reasons that some of our past biodiversity strategies have failed. We focus too much just on the end result without saying how we're going to get there, without trying to set some targets on the drivers. We have now done this for a number of key drivers in the agricultural landscape. In our new biodiversity strategy, we've set targets related to increasing the organic production up to 25%. We've set targets on nutrients, on the incorporation of landscape features, on reduction the use and risk of pesticides. So those are some very precise targets. In other areas, we haven't yet set specific targets, but this is part of the process that we need to move ahead on. And maybe to move on to the global question, we're doing this inside the EU at the moment, but we're fully aware of the fact that the EU is part of a global system, and we can't have a sustainable EU on our own as an island. So we do reach out to other countries, and the main vehicle for reaching out to other countries at the moment, the main sort of dialogue vehicle, is through the process to develop the, hopefully to be adopted next year, post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We hope this will be adopted at the Convention of the Parties on the Convention for Biological Diversity next year. So we are in dialogue with all of the other parties to the CBD, which are most of the countries in the world, to try to make that happen. The EU, finally, I would just say the EU does also give development assistance to a number of countries, but they're, of course, they're allocated in a matter of dialogue with the countries concerned. So it's a matter of the countries concerned also putting forward working on biodiversity as one of their priorities. Thank you.
I often like to say, Anne, that what we need is a European Green Deal everywhere in the world. And if we did that, then we would be very far along, as you say, a new growth path. So everything that you can do for the developing world would be very important. And I think also this is an area where French leadership, I know that President Macron has been putting a lot of emphasis on this, would be extremely valuable. Let me now move to the next question. Because of time, I just want to try and cover as much ground as possible. And one question that really has come is, we are right now at a rescue phase and this comes from Elizabeth Losov's, in most countries, especially in the developing world, and we will need to move to the recovery phase. And of course, the recovery phase is what's going to be really important, because that's when you put together the investment packages that need to support recovery, but also long-term transformation. Most of the packages to date, of course, have been put forward in the advanced economies. And, with the exception of Europe, most of the packages that have been put together have not been very green. So what steps should really be taken in these next 6 to 18 months to really build back better and to ensure that we are pursuing the kind of green recovery that is very much brought out by the discussions that we have had. So any thoughts? I'm sure, Anne, again, you would have good ideas on that from the work of the EU, but if any of the other panelists have, and I'm looking also at Franco from the Colombia side, what do you see in a country like Colombia in this next phase in terms of building back better and moving to a strong and green recovery?
Amar, on this aspect, Colombia has a really a big challenge as another countries in the developing areas in the world, because during the last 6 months was not just a complex problem linked with health situation, but also with economic aspect, and for Latin America was a relevant impact in employees, in development, in poverty. Could be a really important challenges for the next 5 and 10 years, trying to recover the advance of the last 3 decades. So for us is something relevant, trying to work together with governments, also with private sector, with academy, in order to identify new opportunities, in order to identify how to reactivate economy, but it's not in the same area. It's so complex because the human behavior is something that I'm looking all time, trying to define activities and business as usual, because is the common area, is the risk that and you understand how to manage these kind of things. But we need to understand that we need to establish new frameworks in order to develop better the economy and society. We are working together with private sector right now, trying to define specific goals for the next decade, linked with the 2030 agenda, and also work together with governments in 4 countries, trying to move decisions on this land, and finally working together also with UNPRI and UNFFI in the region, trying to move at least 100 financial companies in different activities, trying to establish better options in order to move resources to sustainable activities in the region during the next 10 years. So it's something clever, but we need to understand finally that also are really interesting opportunities for each actor of this area if we are making the right decisions. And this is a tipping point for the region and for the world. We need to understand that.
Thank you very much, Franco. I want to ask Anne and Yannick a question really related to more not what you are doing, but what challenges do you anticipate as you implement the strategies that we are seeing in Europe? I mean, there is, as Anne, you pointed out, now a lot of experimentation going on. But, the time that we have to kind of make the course correction is very short. So, how do we tackle, in some sense, given the urgency and scale of the challenge that you face, what are the challenges that you envisage, say in the European context? And with Yannick particularly, there are tremendous possibilities on R&D, but again, how do we really scale up, and what do you see as the possibilities?
Thank you. I think it's really a challenge. As you say, the time is running very fast, and we do not have a lot of time left for acting. I think that we have different situation in Europe. For western part of Europe, it's more based on the adaptation of existing infrastructure, and for the eastern part, it's more on the development of new infrastructure, on their impact on environment. But for both, we have to develop companies that are able to have a larger impact. Not only in smaller part of countries, but also at European scale or international scale, and to be able to give an equilibrium between civil engineering and green engineering. And to reach this goal, the role of research and innovation and our capacity also to avoid redundancies or to avoid double usage of research and to optimize our investment on those topics. It's really something very important. But we may stay optimistic because, as Jean-François and Lisa said, the awareness is become bigger and bigger. And today, what we have seen through the Green Deal presented by Anne is also a very important point at European scale, but also at international scale, about the importance to create bridges between topics that were very isolated by the past and from very recent years. And when you have a look on what has been done from on the topics that we are discussing today, on what is expected in the upcoming year, I think we can have good hope, but we have a lot of work to do, and we really have to support a strong commitment from all partners that have a goodwill, and companies have a key role to play because they are really cornerstone for action on the field, and we have to collaborate very strongly with them, not only governments, companies isolated, but all together, really.
Thank you, Yannick. And as you answer your question, I mean, I'm also weaving in one that we've gotten from the audience. I mean, you know, as we look forward, particularly to the next COP, you know, we have to think about how we raise ambition on biodiversity, including through national contributions. So, you know, how do you see, you know, given, you know, how do you see what Europe can do in terms of its leadership going into the next COP, and how do you see we can collaborate better at the international level in terms of enhancing national contributions from all parties?
Okay, yes, thank you. Well, certainly we do have a big challenge to move fast because we have already gotten ourselves into a situation we've passed planetary boundaries, and we really need to get back to them. But I can only agree with Yannick that I really think that the private sector is key, and it's not just because we're on a seminar where I think there's a lot of private sector present, but private sector are the ones who make the day-to-day decisions in how our economy functions. And I think that they have a huge role to play in shifting the economy away from being resource intensive to being one that works within the planetary boundaries and in harmony with nature. I don't think, I mean, some people might say it's a matter of lack of money. I don't think it's a lack of money. I think the money is there, but the people who make the decisions about how to spend the money in the private sector, but also in the public sector, need to take into account the value of nature. And they need to both be convinced overall of the importance, but they also need the tools to be able to say, yes, if I don't do this down the road, it's going to cause me all of these additional costs. If we have those kind of tools available, cost me or cost the society certain things. I think we need to have those tools to be able to measure and to illustrate the impact of the choices that we have to make. And I think that will help move both companies and the private and the public sector forward. Certainly, we need to get all of the different countries of the world on board. And the EU does intend to lead if we can, but leaders need followers. We don't want to be leading out ahead without anyone else accompanying us. We'd rather actually march hand in hand. So, I mean, we have announced our objectives, our goals, and we do that hoping that this will also motivate others to do the same thing. But I do think, again, in this case, that the big international companies also have a huge role to play, because there are global networks of supply chains, of value chains, where big private companies can have a huge influence over how economies develop and how decisions are made in far-reaching corners of the world. So I certainly do think we need to get them on board. it's also important, obviously, to have the general public on board. I mean, we have presented the European Green Deal, but all of the individual targets and objectives still need to be put into specific legislative instruments, and they will need to go through the normal decision-making process in the EU, which means approval by the Council and the Parliament. And particularly, the Parliament is very heavily influenced by public opinion. Public opinion is moving towards a greater understanding of the importance of natural capital and ecosystems. But hopefully that trend will continue. I think getting some champions out there is important. Getting people who know how to talk to the public, who are seen as role models, who are respected, who are listened to help communicate what it is we're aiming to achieve and why. And biodiversity is complex. It's not always easy to explain to people why ecosystems are providing so many fundamental services to our society. But that needs to be communicated, and it needs to enter into the thinking in the companies, in the thinking in the public sector, but also in the general public conscience.
Thank you very much for that, Anne. I mean, I think we can all agree that, you know, strong involvement of the private sector will be absolutely key. But we also, I think, need a little bit more exploration around what are the impediments to the private sector, including the financial dimension. You know, in the biodiversity space and in the natural capital space, one of the challenges is that as you say, you know, the benefits come over a long period of time, and you only think of it as an opportunity cost, and there isn't a very direct, often revenue stream that it produces or a cash flow. So coming up with models that really create incentives for sustainable investment in this natural capital and biodiversity space, I personally feel is still very much work in progress. And I think I want to turn, therefore, in closing to Jean-Francois and Lisa, because in some sense, what you are doing is something very much on the ground and in partnership with the private sector. As you said, you don't own the land. You know, it has to be done very much in partnership, not just with the private sector, but with a diverse and complex private sector. And so I wanted to very much ask you to elaborate on what do you see are the opportunities? How do you see the response from the private sector? And what do you think are the obstacles that have to be overcome?
Sorry, yes. First of all, I wanted to say to Adrian Katisawa from Africa, from Tanzania, that we are working in a collaborative global community that's called the SIGRE, where all the power system expertise is working together. So what I've been presenting before, we are presenting those subjects at the SIGRE, and there are some African companies there. So we try to develop collaboration and to show the work that we are doing so that we can share in other countries, not just European. What I wanted to say also is that so I'm an ecologist, and when I come at RTE, the ecological knowledge is not very something comprised in an electricity transport company, and I think that they don't know how to do. And so they don't know that the natural solution can be best solution that have to be developed. So biodiversity is more considered like a constraint. And when the stakeholders are coming to RTE and ask us to cooperate on biodiversity management, then it creates a value for the company. And then the constraints begin to be opportunity. And that's very important for a company because for the outside, for the research, then you are always speaking about impacts on biodiversity. And that's not how a company is functioning. On a company, you are always speaking about value you are created. And that's why I think that there is a little gap there that have to be exchanged well, it have to be a collaboration to speak about that. And that's how I think it would be better if a company have more ecological knowledge inside, so that we can move forward for better solution.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to all the panelists. It has been a very rich discussion. I think, it tells us that we are really at a time where the challenge is the opportunity. That's the theme I took away, Lisa, very much from what you just said, and that, there is and the opportunity comes essentially because right now of the power of the private sector innovation and a new kind of public-private partnership. But acting early in the way that our keynote address highlighted is the answer in my view. I want to now just turn it over to Kate to see if she has any final remarks, and to Ryan to remind us again that this is the first of a series. So on my side, I just want to thank everybody for this quite exciting discussion, bringing the importance of nature and infrastructure solutions together. And I'd like to close by handing this back to Kate and to Ryan. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Amar. You did a fantastic job, and thank you so much to our wonderful speakers. I've learned so much today, and I look forward to learning so much more in the weeks to come. I just wanted to point out, somebody in the questions asked about a connection to the Commission on Ecosystem Management within IUCN, and it raises a good point that this coalition came together because we're a community of individuals fascinated by this issue of infrastructure, but it's not the end of the growth of a community like this. And we welcome engagement with other groups, and we'll continue to explore that and look forward to hearing from you through the chat through the website that Ryan's going to show and provide in a moment. And I really welcome further engagement from all of you in the weeks to come, and then maybe see you in Marseille when everything is better and we're all back on the road. But it's been great to have this opportunity to engage an even broader group virtually. So thanks for coming, and please come again. Thanks to the panelists and Amar, our fearless facilitator and moderator. And Ryan, take it away for closing us out. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. And yeah, thanks again to the panelists and Amar. And to the more than 200 of you that joined us for this 90-minute first session. As I said at the beginning, it was really, this first session is the chance to really kind of introduce the topics that we're going to go into in much more detail in subsequent sessions. So just to remind you that we have 5 more that are still coming, including the next one 2 weeks from now on October 15th, which is really focused on the upstream planning and enabling conditions and the policy environment that Amar just highlighted as so important for really facilitating more sustainable, climate resilient, biodiversity friendly infrastructure investments. Please go to this page if you want to sign up for this series. and learn more information, please share it with your networks as well. So thank you so much again to everyone for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, everyone.